Welcome everyone. This is Devon CCG governing body in common. Really common. That was when we had to grab the two governing body public meeting. Welcome to our guests. Charlotte, I'll give you a moment in a moment to introduce them. Can I just remind people that this is, sorry, bear with me, my kettle's just whistling. I've completely forgotten I've turned that on. I'm very, very sorry. I remind people this is a public meeting and it will be recorded and it'll be made available in full, unedited, for the public to play back and to listen to via our website. We've got a good and varied agenda that we will work our way through, and I will endeavour to keep us to time. But before we get through into the business, it's always really valuable to start with a focus of why we do this and what really matters. And that's why Charlotte is given this role of making sure that we focus on the people we care for and the people of Devon. So Charlotte, let's get our focus right before we get stuck into the business, please. Over to you.
Okay. Hi, so I'd like to introduce Gemma and Adam from the Wolseley Trust, and they're going to introduce themselves a little bit more in a minute and talk about their role in social prescribing. And then really grateful for Neil for joining us, for going to spend some time just telling us about his story and his experience of social prescribing. So I'm going to hand over to either Adam or Gemma to kick us off. And then we'll move into Neil, and then as always we'll have some questions after everyone's had a chance to speak.
Okay. Shall I start?
Yeah, go
I'll start. Okay. My name is Gemma Gowan, and I, as Charlotte said, I work for the Wolseley Trust, and I manage the health and wellbeing projects that we provide as a trust. So we are based in Plymouth, and there are two arms to what we do. We have our business arms, so we have two business parks which we manage, and that creates an income. And then the main part of my role is how we use that income to benefit the local community. So we're based in North Prospect, and we have an area of benefit for our trust, which is North Prospect, Keam and Stoke. And we support people living in that local area to improve their well-being, improve aspirations for employment, and improve community connection and opportunities for local people. As part of that, for the last 10 years, we've been offering a social prescribing service, which is mainly focused on that area. But in the last couple of years, we've been able to roll it out to other areas of the city. And we're now providing a service citywide through funding from 6 primary care networks to 33 surgeries in Plymouth. And the way that it's set up is we have a team of 9 link workers like Adam, and each link worker spends at least a day a week dedicated to individual GP practices, working very closely with their teams, getting to know their teams, getting to know their patients, and we accept referrals for anyone who presents to primary care, has something which is affecting their health and well-being, but may have a more community or social, non-medical, non-clinical solution. So then the link worker will spend some time with that person, find out what their goals are, and work alongside them to help them to move forward, which Adam will talk about a bit more, and Neil will share his experience of. So that's my role in a nutshell. I oversee the social prescribing service, and it's ever growing and changing. We mould it around feedback that we get from the GP practices that we work with, also experiences of link workers and the people who use our service. So it never stops, and it's great, and we love working with our GP partners.
Afternoon. It's hard to think what to add to that. Gemma's covered quite a lot. So I'm a social prescribing link worker. I cover Mount Gold Surgery, Stoke and Dean's Cross. I have a ceiling of 40 patients who I can see on my caseload. And I see people with a wide range of needs. So it could be housing, benefits, social activities, befriending. So yeah, literally anything. I think that's about it, really. I think Gem's covered it all.
Thanks, Adam. I'm sure there'll be some questions, but before we move into that, Neil, would you mind sharing your experience as someone who's had social prescribing?
Yeah. I don't know how I'll get on the screen or anything, but
Screen, nice and clear.
oh, cool. Okay. Yeah, no, to be honest with you, I got pointed towards the Wolseley Trust by the local unemployment centre, my job advisor, because I've got long-term sort of health conditions, got a really bad back, and I can't do an awful lot of stuff. Kind of ummed and ahed about it, and I finally got in contact with Adam. It was kind of good. I've got to be honest with you. He's a really friendly fellow, and he's kind of given me a little bit of an aim at something. I mean, I'm an absolute football nut, and he suggested something that I probably enjoy, which is walking football, which is not exactly the ideal thing to do at the moment, what with COVID-19 and all the closed shutdowns and sanctions and everything else. But he's actually kind of given me a little bit of a lease of life on it, to be honest with you. I was starting to get a little bit more interested because I was bored to death, if I'm totally honest, sitting around doing absolutely nothing all day, curing the internet or something. He's also directed me at a few courses that I could do if I chose to. And I'm starting to actually feel like someone's listening to me, if I'm totally honest. I never got that impression when I was at my GP, which unfortunately you represent, and I've just had to leave because they were absolutely appalling. I've just had to register with a new doctor weeks ago, and I'm hoping I'll get a little bit more update from them. As far as it goes, it's looking pretty good, because there is he speaks to me like a human being, not like I was a specimen, you know. And I like that. We have a laugh and a chat on the phone when we speak. We might possibly go over his time a little bit, like, you know what I mean, but we generally just chat about this, that, and everything else. And I find that everything that he does is actually quite useful to me and invigorating. I mean, I did give him fair warning that he was going to come out of this quite well. Yeah, and I hope he's not getting too embarrassed, because I think he does a really blinding good job of what he does, to be honest with you. And as I say, for me, I enjoy it. I mean, yeah, I can talk to him about anything, if I'm totally honest. I was asking him something that was quite off the wall a couple of weeks ago. He's gone out of his way to find out a little bit about it for me, so he can actually give me a bit of information. Like, it was an eviction and whatever, and I was a little bit concerned about it. And he went out of his way to find out a little bit for me. And yeah, no, I find it good. It works for me. You know what I mean? And I'm hoping that we can maybe, when we get a little bit of respite and we can actually get out and about and go around places where we can go, then I can actually start doing the things that we've suggested, or that he suggested to me. You know what I mean? It's one of those unfortunate aspects. It can't be done at the minute because of that. I'm kind of a little bit of a loss to what to say. I thought I was going to be asked some questions, sort of thing, like, you know what I mean? I didn't know I was going to have to just make a plain, straight out statement, sort of thing. So it's a little bit.
After questions,
we will have questions.
To get your experience and to get some insight. But I can see there's already a question from John. So.
Okay. A bit of feedback somewhere. So thank you, Neil, for hearing your story. And I was interested about what you said at the very beginning, which is your journey more recently seems to have you made contact to Adam and the trust, not through your GP, but through through sort of work and pensions and finance side of things, which is absolutely how the system should work. It does sound as if, Adam, you're a social prescription yourself, not a social prescriber. So congratulations on being so effective. Can I ask Adam, do you have a database? How do you, having spoken to Neil, do you have a resource that you can look at that tells you what's available that might be something that would help Neil in his journey?
So as part of a team, we've got some admin assistants, and we've got a database that we can access with a fairly up-to-date list of organisations and services that are available. So the really important thing is that me and Neil have quite an in-depth conversation to find out what his needs are and what he's interested in, and then I can go away and match up what's available and come back with a few options for him. I mean, obviously I can point him in the right direction, and if he's capable, he can go and find that information as well. But yeah, we've got a team sort of database that we can access.
Gaynor?
Thank you, Adam.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a couple of questions. Neil, can I ask you? You said that when you first met Adam, that he didn't treat you like a specimen. He treated you like a human being.
Yeah.
And I'm just really interested in your perspective of how that felt. So what did he do? Presumably he didn't have a laptop.
He talked to me like a human being. We were speaking on the telephone. He was genuinely interested, and what he could actually do for me.
Yeah.
And I don't know, we just sort of hit it off straight away. I think it seemed like we were chatting for ages on the telephone. It didn't seem anything intrusive or anything like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was like two old mates having a chat, and I've never met him before. So it was a really, really nice feeling, and it's a good. I want to say it's a good feeling when you finally find someone who's listening to you, but I don't want to go into a case of really having a go at my ex-GP and the medical centre. They don't practice medicine where I was an ex-patient. They process patients, and I was sick to death of being treated like a specimen by them.
Mm-hmm.
To be honest with you, I completely had enough, and I've actually left the surgery now and joined another surgery.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I enjoy speaking about him, and he's always got some good ideas for what I can do that will sort of interest me.
Good.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And when you went to, because you said he talked about doing the walk-in football, and you found that. Did you just did he give you like an address and you went on your own?
Oh, he's given me a couple.
Yeah.
He keeps. I knew where there was one, and he knew there was no one. He told me about another place that does it as well, and yeah, no, he's full of information, the fella.
Brilliant.
Really
excellent.
is.
Thank
I
you.
can't ask any more, to be honest with you.
No, it sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
So Gemma or Adam probably can answer this. Do you have a referral criteria? Are there certain, there might be some conditions, or might be some, something that you'd say, no, we can't help with that, or do you just, sort of embrace everybody really?
We generally embrace everybody. We do have a couple of exceptions. So at the moment, because of the case loading expectations of the link workers, we do ask that when someone is referred, or if someone's encouraged to self-refer, they are capable of engaging and able to make decisions about what they want and take those next steps. And they might not be at a place where they can do it at that time. We can do some motivational work with them, but capable of it. We're not suitable for people that are experiencing mental health crisis or have an unmet immediate mental health need. But we do work very closely with our local mental health teams. So if we're working with someone and we are concerned about their mental well-being, because we're not a clinical team, then we're able to connect them where it's appropriate.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Simons, then Sonia, then Paul.
Thank you. So Neil, I'm sorry that you had a bad experience of general practice. I'm a GP in East Devon. I want to just ask a couple of questions. One, do you think you should have been able to self-refer to this service rather than having maybe to be signposted there by the GP? And two, do you think this well-being that you've got now will last going forwards? And I just wanted to ask a question to Gemma after that, if I could.
Well, regarding the self-referral, it's a matter of finding out about it. It's where you find out about it from, really, isn't it? I mean, it is posted up in my ex-surgery, but it was actually posted to me, or not posted to me, mentioned to me by my job advisor at the job centre. That's where it really came from. Sorry, I've forgotten the second part of the question. What was it?
I just wondered whether you feel that the well-being that you've got is going to last.
Yeah, I think it will, to be honest with you, because it's given me a bit of a lift. You know, I don't feel that it's kind of all done and dusted anymore. Like, I'm really suffered with my mobility, to be honest with you. That's why we were talking about the walking football. I mean, I can manage to walk about 100 yards, and that's about it. Even I can do that outside football. You know, so yeah, I'm kind of quite uplifted by it as well, and it's also a nice, it's a nice avenue to have if I need to find something out specific. It might not be something that they can specifically sort me for, but I can give me a signpost.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it's nice in that respect. It's a good feeling of support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope you'll tell lots of people that you live near about this service, because I think the more people know about it, the better, really.
Well, I certainly wouldn't poo-poo it. If somebody asked me about it, I'd say, yeah, it works for me. You know, and if they needed a little bit more information, I'd be quite happy.
Okay.
You know, not an issue.
Great. Can I ask Gemma? I don't know how many patients you think you see relative to the 1,000 patients on a GP's list, and I don't know whether you know, but there's a new fund coming into primary care networks called the Impact and Investment Fund that actually incentivizes GPs to refer up to 8 patients per 1,000 registered with them. There's money in that fund to support that. I just wonder whether you're ready for that potential numbers, and if the GPs found 8 people per 1,000 registered with them to refer to you, would you be able to cope?
That's a really good question. So the way that we work with people at the moment is we offer up to 8 appointments, and those appointments can last up to an hour. So for me, the best thing about social prescribing is that we are able to give people time and really explore with them what matters to them. If we were to become overwhelmed, my concern would be that we would either have to compromise on time or start to hold a waiting list, because as a link worker, sometimes the pressures of the role, when you're working with people that are very diverse and you have to do quite a bit of background work sometimes to really be able to explore with them what it is that would best suit them, then we do protect the caseloads of the link workers. But we're having conversations with some of the PCNs that we're working with about them using their funding for additional social prescribers if they feel they need it. And we report to them the rate of their referral so that they can make those judgments as they're to spend their ARRS money. So yeah, I think we could. I think as long as we were well supported by the practices that we work with.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe, did you want to come in before Paul on that point?
Hi, thanks, Charlotte. So I was actually going to come in and ask a question of Jem. Well, first of all, I want to thank Neil for coming, because it's really fantastic to meet you and hear your experience. I was just going to ask Gemma actually about, well, 2 things. What would you say are the key ingredients, I suppose, that have made this really successful where you are? And then I'm just going to ask you, secondly, in terms of the onward offer, have you identified significant gaps that you haven't been able to help support people with? And has that been a big issue, and how have you overcome that?
Okay. So sorry, what was the first question? Oh, sorry, Joe.
You're on mute,
You're on mute, Joe.
Thank you again. But the first question was just really about the sort of key ingredients, I suppose, that have made it really successful in your organisation.
So I think for us, we've been social prescribing for a long time, and that's evolved significantly over the last 10 years. And we're a voluntary and community sector organisation ourselves. So we have those relationships with our other voluntary and community sector partners. We understand the flexibility of the sector. And I think our experience of it, and having worked with some of the local GP practices in Plymouth over a number of years, has helped to contribute to that success. So we really understand what social prescribing is, what social prescriptions are. And I think when you read about it in the press, it often talks about kind of connecting people to things like knitting groups and choirs, which it is. But there's quite a large part of the work is supporting people with financial issues and housing and things that can cause them significant distress. So with that in mind, and with the experience of that, that's really enabled us to build our model to how it is now, and really have those positive relationships with our local PCNs. They were quite lucky because they got to try before they buy, really. We had some funding from some other avenues, so we could work with them beforehand. And in terms of gaps, we work quite closely with our local commissioners, and we do feedback where there are gaps. So at the moment, there is some gaps around housing and specific housing support for people depending on what their challenge around housing is. So the link workers have to really manage expectations of people that they're working with sometimes, and we do communicate with GPs if they're making a referral, particularly around something where there is a gap like housing, to try and manage that expectation a bit as well, so that we can, so for example, if someone's referred to us and they're told by the person referring them that social prescriber will sort your housing out for you, and it's unlikely we're able to do that, then we can just be real. And we do struggle sometimes with supporting people to access appropriate mental health services. And again, we will feed that back to local commissioners and our primary care partners, and look at how we can work together to plug some of those gaps, either within primary care or secondary care, or in the voluntary and community sector.
Thanks. Paul, do you want to come in now, and then Graham?
Yeah, so definitely thank you to all three of you. It ties into a conversation that we as a governing body were having this morning, which was how local organisations and voluntary organisations can work much more closely together. So when you talk about housing and mental health, and sports facilities and outdoor availability, all of those sort of things, it's exactly the sort of thing that we would love to see happening more within a local place and be more joined up. So it fits with all the things that we were talking about and wanting to plan ourselves, and work with people like yourself to make sure we get that as good as it can be, so that you don't have those gaps and those frustrations, I guess. Neil, I guess I've got two things first of all, thanks, but then two things. Firstly, I don't know whether you can see the chat bar that comes up here, but they're talking about making you into a bit of a TV star because they think it's such a great story to tell that others should hear it. And my last one is, you being a football fan, I've just got one question. Home Park or St James's?
Home Park. Well, White Hart Lane, to be honest with you. I'm a Spurs fan.
All right, well then I'm going to keep very quiet that I'm either Exeter City or Chelsea, then I'll keep that one to myself.
Fair play. See what happens at the end of the season. Wrong end of the season to be talking football, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll catch up next spring.
That would do it, yeah. That would do it. See if we're still in the same division.
Sorry, Charlotte, back to you.
That's okay. Graham, did you have a question?
Yes, please. Can I, first of all, Neil, this is Graham speaking. Can I just say thank you? And thanks for braving the computer experience. I would have loved to have been in the same room with you today and shook your hand and got to know you. So thank you for spending the time doing this. It's been great. My question is for Gemma, if I can. Gemma, you clearly provide a really individual service to individual people. Every case and person you deal with is different. How do you measure success in a way that then convinces those who provide you with funding that you're doing a great job. You evidently are, from what Neil said, but how do you aggregate that success up and measure it?
Yeah, that's the £1 million question, I think. So we have measures that we've used over the years. We've used the Warwick Edinburgh scale. We're currently using ONS4, so 4 wellbeing questionnaires and 4 wellbeing questions even. So we can collect some of that qualitative data around how people feel that their anxiety is being reduced and their wellbeing is being increased. The best way we find to share information, and I'll embed it in every report that I send, will be sharing stories, because every person that we work with is completely different. Their outcomes will be different. Someone might work with a link worker over 8 appointments and may have taken very small steps, or simply just have some knowledge and confidence to do some small things, whereas other people might have engaged with all sorts of things and gone on to start a new business or a new enterprise themselves. So and that's really hard to measure in any other way apart from stories. So so that's the core of it for me.
Thanks very much. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sonia, sorry, I missed you earlier.
That's okay. And Joe, the question I had about gaps, but I guess I was just reflecting. So hi all, I'm Sonia Mant. I'm one of the executive team, and I've had the benefit of working on some of the integrated care developments locally. I guess my question probably to Gemma and Adam is, obviously COVID has been extraordinary for us all, and I wanted to thank you and all your colleagues and partners on the efforts that you've been putting in locally to support everyone during this time. But I guess I was reflecting, the last time I met some of your colleagues was down at the Jan Cutting Centre, I think it was, when it opened some time ago, and that was really celebrating a lot of people coming together and supporting each other in new and innovative ways, but it was very much about a physical coming together. And I'm sure you have challenges now in supporting ways very differently, people moving forward. I assume you're going to have to really adapt over the next 6, 9, 12 months to finding new ways of supporting people. Is there any support that we can offer? Anything that you have identified that will be a particular challenge that we need to be mindful of?
Yeah, I think we've adapted really well. It's come with lots of positives as well as challenges. For me personally, I've been able to be a lot more flexible with my time. So rather than having an hour appointment with somebody, and if somebody weren't to attend, you've got to be able to keep yourself busy for that hour. We can flexibly move on and speak to somebody else. In terms of challenges, I only got to see Neil's face for the first time last week. It's really nice to put a face to a voice once you've built up a relationship with somebody. And I think there's a lot of trust in that as well. I think it's very different meeting somebody face to face than it is over the phone, especially if somebody's got complex mental health problems. They might be a little bit paranoid, might not like just speaking to a random person over the phone. But I think another challenge we have as well is not being able to access notes and surgeries. For us, that's a huge one. Just because you can kind of build up a little bit of background about a person and kind of understand where they're coming from a little bit easier, but also feeding back to the surgeries and letting them know how you're working with them and how they're progressing, and how that could link into any of their GP visits. So that's one of the biggest challenges for us, I think. I don't know, Jem, have you got anything to add to that?
No, that's probably there's some feedback there. Sorry. That's one of the main things for me is, as Adam said, one of the struggles we had even before COVID was we're working very closely with surgeries. We're part of their team, but we've really struggled to be able to access patient notes as a voluntary and community sector partner. And I absolutely understand the data protection and GDPR requirements around that. But now that we are working remotely, it would really benefit us. And there's ongoing conversations with data protection officers around that, but it would greatly enhance the service if there was a way that we could have a look at that.
Okay, thank you.
John, you had that, and Simon, I think.
Thank you. So I just want to follow up on what Sonia said, because I think it's really, really important. And a question to Adam, because what we found in the northern locality is that the number of social groups has actually reduced significantly as a result of COVID. The volunteer sector has shrunk because people have been anxious about getting out and meeting other people, etc. So do you find, Adam, that the options available to you when you go to look for help for other people and where you might signpost them to, have you noticed over the last 6 months that the options available have reduced or not?
Yeah, hugely. And that's been a challenge in itself. It's one of the reasons I thought Neil would be a good example, because he originally came to me with what could be viewed as a pretty straightforward request of he was looking into some kind of social activity where he could meet people, have a little bit of exercise, get out of the house. After our initial conversations, I thought, brilliant, I know, what you might be interested in, I could signpost him here. But obviously then we went into lockdown and everything shut down. And you don't want to turn around to anybody and say, oh, sorry, the service isn't there. So me and Neil have been in regular contact for the last 6 months, just monitoring the situation, just seeing when services come back in. But there's been a huge problem with it, and a lot of people who are looking for befriending services, who want to meet up face to face because they're socially isolated. That's another barrier for them. So yeah,
that's something that we as a governing body need to consider, because if those options are not available to you, then actually people like Neil and others may then develop new challenges that might put an extra pressure on the health service, and then it goes round and round. So we need to consider how we can support the voluntary sector, but we've been asked that in the north, how we can support those groups who are struggling, because if they don't survive this COVID epidemic and stay operational, then there'll be repercussions across vast swathes of society. So you're bearing out what has happened in other areas, and we need to consider this because it has an impact on lots of other services, including the NHS. So thank you.
Thank you.
Last question, Simon, please.
One of the things that we identified in primary care was that if we could digitally enable our population, it would hugely improve our connection with our patients. So we put that to our local voluntary sector, and they've now got some money through Big Lottery to digitally enable our community. Is that something we could help you with, perhaps? Is that something you could see as an asset for yourselves? How would we help you? How would you go about doing it? Would you get people to go in? One of the things going on in Honiton is that they're doing sort of Zoom face conferencing groups for patients living with dementia and their carers, which is being really helpful apparently to those individuals. And I'm just wondering if that's the sort of thing you're looking at or thinking about in the current environment. Great that Neil's here with us, but there are lots of people who can't do that.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've had some conversation with some of our PCNs that we're working with around how we can support some of their patients to be more confident using tech for appointments, to have access to the devices and access to the Wi-Fi. So there's 3 pieces of work to do there really with people. And there are some pockets of small projects in Plymouth where that's happening, but there isn't kind of a consistent centralised service which people can tap into. So it's something that we've had a conversation with Plymouth City Council about, and there is a working around it, but at the moment that access to technology and that confidence building for people is something that's becoming quite essential while we're working in the way that we are, so people can still access social opportunities.
Thank you. So I just want to say thank you so much to Neil, Adam and Gemma. We really appreciate you coming and taking time out to share with us today. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Neil. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Gemma.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
If there's any other GB that want to read more, I've just posted the social prescribing report in the notes there. It's an interim report, but it's got a lot more details.
Charlotte, that's really helpful. And thank you
Thanks,
for organising that. That was definitely time well spent. Neil, you are welcome to stay for the rest of this, but I'm sure you have better things to do. But thank you very much.
I was just about to ask, can I hang up now?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
John,
Enjoy that. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
John, thanks for organising.
Thanks all. Brilliant. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte. Thank you for that. I'm going through apologies, and Nikki, I know that we've got Ginny Snaith and David Greenweller's apologies, and Virginia Pearson, but I don't know if Steve Brown is still with us. Thank you, Steve. So Steve Brown is deputising for Virginia, and anyone else I've missed, Nikki?
Ruth Harrell and James Waldridge.
Okay, thank you very much, Nikki. Thank you. Register of interests, any additions or corrections that we need to make to those, the register? Nick?
Yes, Paul, as I said in the private one, there's two that should have come off at the end of August, the reference to the Blackdown Orthopaedic Services and Staple Grove Anaesthetic Group. I'm no longer a member of either of those.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, Nick.
There's no impact for today's papers.
No, okay, all right. And any specific conflicts that people need to declare based on today's agenda? No, that's fine. Okay, so that takes us to the minutes, and I will go through page by page. This is for the governing body from the 27th of August. And if I do it on the page of the minutes rather than the total pages, that should hopefully work for everyone. So that's pages 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10, 11, 12 and 13. Okay, we will take those as an accurate representation of record of our governing body meeting last month. If we go to the action log, we've got a few just to go through. Action 1 was for Joe and myself to discuss LCPs with the GP practice colleagues and feedback to governing body members. There's been a number of discussions, most recently earlier in this week, and I know governing body are aware of that. So we can mark that as complete, please, Nikki. The next two are recommended for closure, and so let's those look as though they've been dealt with. And then item 4, which was at the last meeting that I wasn't here for, was Sheila, you were asking if we'd had conversations with clinical staff members about the working from home preferences. Is that something, because we've asked, you know, our non-clinical staff and we've addressed some of those home working issues, is that just making sure that we are equitable and talking to them as well?
That was Sheila's point, yes, Paul.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And that's been put to me. I'm very happy to make sure that happens. So Andrew, that might be something we can do through HR, just make sure that they've had the same HR conversations as everyone else.
Yep, okay.
Okay, all right. So we'll move that action over to Andrew, please, that'd be great. The next two are for closure. And then item 7, it was raised, how many referees should we have for the Devon STP lead role, and to consider 3 or 4 referees and peers was going to link in with Gagan B. Sarlison. He's not mentioned anything more to me. Graham, you've not known whether that conversation happened in my absence, do you?
No, I know that Nikki Coombs chased that conversation. I think it's still for peers to confirm with Melanie Shearer the number that's normally asked for at this level of job.
Well, we've got a working group meeting next week, so we will double check with Melanie to see if peers has had that conversation. If not, we will cover that with her then, and then hopefully be able to report back next governing body for closure. Okay, and then the last 3 items are all for closure, and unless anyone has any concerns over those, we will count those as complete. That's fine. Great, thank you. On to item 5, which is the chair's report. it's brief for the main issues that I've been involved in over the course of since the last governing body, partly because of annual leave, but I will take it as read. The only item to add in is the system lead executive role. You should have all hopefully had the link through to the application website with the details on it. Please let me know if you haven't, because that then goes into a lot more depth than the link for the job advert that is there. We caught up with Gator B. Sanderson earlier in the week, Susie and I, and there have been some interest, no formal applications yet, but some interest from some people who certainly seem to have quite a good amount of experience from elsewhere in the country around system leadership, commissioning and acute provision. So it does look promising at this early stage. Any questions on that report? No, and then we will go straight over to Simon for the Accountable Officers report then, please.
Okay, thanks, Paul. So just three things from the report. So item 2 around returning to CCG offices. So you'll remember that I reported that the offices are now COVID safe. However, given the Prime Minister's announcement this week, we've reiterated to staff that they should work at home if they can. And I did that on the live staff webinar yesterday. Item number 3, we've now had 3 of our virtual public meetings on the Teignmouth and Dawlish consultation. So I attended the first 2, Paul the third one. Attendance has not been as strong as we would have liked. So I think we've had certainly in the first 2, 30 across the 2 meetings. The majority of the questions have been about transport and parking. We're hoping that we're going to do a bit more advertisement to try to get more people to engage with that. We think it might have been caused by the time of day. So yesterday's went on and think until 6:30, and we have a Saturday one coming up, and we're hoping that that will garner a larger number of people engaging. And then item number 5, just wanted to remind governing body about the staff awards. So we launched those about 3 weeks ago, I think. We've had 50 nominations, but it would be great if we could get some more nominations for that. And we're going to make sure that we invite all the governing body, obviously, to the awards ceremony. But it would be lovely to have some people nominated from the governing body as well. So happy to take any questions, Paul.
Okay, any questions for Simon? No. Okay, thank you very much, Simon. So that takes us on to item 7.1, which is the integrated care system governance. The paper is there with proposed governance, including terms of reference, membership and structure of the ICS, particularly focusing on the ICS Partnership Board. And we are asked to approve or otherwise this paper. Just to help the conversation that we have at the moment, governing body members had an opportunity to consider and reflect on this paper and talk to Philippa Slinger, the System Chief Executive, earlier on today. And to summarise some of the key additions or alterations that we would like to see within the paper. The first one would be to add in the terms of reference that we would expect certainly the chairs, but at least but preferably the chairs and leaders, to have a non-executive assurance role on the board, ensuring that it represents and benefits the whole of the population of Devon. That when we're talking about its role to hold this system to account, to include the elements of equality and diversity, and also on equity of access and outcomes. And the other feedback was there was a request that the whole system engagement forum would meet more frequently than every 6 months, because particularly around patient and public engagement, it was felt that that needed to be more frequent, particularly given the pace of change that we are seeing within the health and social care system in Devon. I hope that sort of summarises the key points that for us that we raised. Any other questions or comments that we would like to consider for this before we go to the point of considering approval? Okay, so I think it's helpful if I can also then summarise that there was definitely a feeling that this is a good pragmatic solution to trying to get partners working together. That was definitely a feedback, and it would be good for us to acknowledge that within the public meeting, that it did represent an effort to ensure that place within the local care partnerships was fully embedded within the system, and apart from those provisos, it was felt that this was an appropriate way forward. So if we are to recommend those changes, are people happy to agree this paper, as long as those changes are made to the governance process and structure?
Yep.
I'm going to take it by exception. So anyone not? Okay. So we take that as approved. I will write to Susie Leather as the independent chair of the STP, which will become the ICS, outlining our decision and making those recommended requesting those recommended changes, and feedback to governing body at the next meeting the response that I get back from Susie. So Nikki, if you can capture that as an action for me, please, that'd be really helpful. That then takes us on to item 8. We are due a break, but I'm aware that we are quite ahead of time, and there is still some other business that we will need to attend to at the end of this public meeting. So I'm keen for us to continue unless I hear otherwise. Okay, well, let's press on, and let's press on with item 8.1, the finance report. John.
Thank you, Chair. So just reporting on the financial position for the CCG to the end of August. For any members of the public watching this back, the paper, which starts on page 50 of the pack, includes quite a lot of background information on the context that we were working in pre-COVID. And for governing body members, just a reminder that that financial framework was suspended, and we've been working with an emergency COVID response financial framework across the across the NHS, which we now know will be in place until the end of September. And that financial framework provides that all costs reasonably incurred will be funded, either by direct allocation or by a retrospective claim process. The table on page 57 of the report, or page 5 on the board packs. Section 3 of my report shows the income and expenditure across that period. So for the period until the end of August, it shows at that stage that we have an £8 million adverse variance, an £8 million overspend, which we expect to be recovered through the retrospective claim process that I mentioned. So that will be fully reimbursed in the month of September. So we do expect to reach the end of September, which I'll report on next month, at a break-even position, which is what will be required of us, and we do expect to achieve that. Section 4 of the report on page 62 just shows in a little bit more detail the expenditure that we've had directly related to the COVID pandemic response. About £31.5 million that's been directly incurred through the CCG on the items that are sort of listed out there. The largest single element of that being the faster hospital discharge programme, where we have worked closely with our local authority colleagues in putting in place a number of service responses to get people through hospital more quickly. Final thing to say, section 5 of the report just sets out the risks to delivery, and I should say that's risk to delivery in the first 6 months of the year only, where we identified the biggest risk there was around whether we would be successful in getting all of the costs reimbursed. Our experience to date has increased our confidence around that. We've had everything back so far, so that risk would be assessed as very low for the remaining month. What is obviously increasingly of more interest is what happens in the second 6 months of the year. We are close to knowing what that looks like. Last knock-ins of discussions with government sort of happening at a NHS level, but I'll be able to report more fully on that at next governing body meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Judy.
John, thank you very much. This is a small point in the context of our total budgets, but in the last month or two, we've been quite concerned about the prescribing budget, and there was quite a big looming or anticipated possible deficit because of some of the issues that were happening and some of the predictions. Am I right in understanding now that we are no longer worried about that, the trends we're seeing in this no available others, or whatever the right word is, because your thing on section 3, page 5, suggests that this is no longer a concern, the table.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. So I wouldn't say it's no longer a concern, but we've as the year progresses, we start to get more actual data rather than having to forecast. So the information that we've had in the more recent months has been a little bit brighter on that front. So I wouldn't say that it's no longer a concern, but it has improved slightly over the last couple of months. I mean, that there are a couple of significant factors, being the ongoing impact of the pandemic and EU exit, that would make us continue to be concerned about that. But it has improved in the last couple of months. Thank you.
Let's take Nick and then Simon together, and then back to John to take both of those two. Nick.
Thank you, John. You say that high-level discussions are going on about the funding for the next 6 months, and presumably that includes the sort of any additional funding for, inverted commas, COVID. But what about for recovery programs? So, for example, with the significant waiting lists and so on. Now, if there was we wanted to make a decision to do a whole lot of additional work at weekends or something like that as a way of reducing waiting lists, when would one find out about, would that be funded as COVID extra work, for example? How will we find out about that?
Okay. And Simon? Simon, you might be muted.
Yes, thank you, John. You mentioned, I think, quite significant expenditure, joint expenditure, which was in the COVID period to allow people to be discharged more quickly, and that's now come to an end from the 1st of September. And I'm aware in the East they are concerned that numbers of patients in the hospital escalating. And I'm not able really to get a handle on whether or not the loss of that funding is having an effect, an adverse effect. Can you give us some assurance that we've got some close monitoring on the effect of not having that funding potentially causing significantly delays in discharge as we had before COVID?
Okay. If I take the second question first, and sorry, Simon, I've possibly painted the wrong picture there. The hospital discharge programme will continue for the second 6 months of the year, and the source of funding for that is likely to sit outside of the allocation that we're made locally. So it shouldn't be the case that anything is stopping for want of funding in there. The thing which changes, and it's quite a significant change for the second 6 months, is during the COVID response period, we have stood down all forms of assessment for continuing care and that sort of thing. There is an expectation that those assessment processes will be stood up again. And we are working again closely with local authority colleagues about getting those up and running. So there is an expectation that the cost of that scheme may shift around a little bit between health and social care again, but it isn't the case that the hospital discharge programme funding is stopping. On Nick's point, so I think the issue of backlog is a very difficult one, Nick, and there's a large extent to which that's not about money per se. It's about physical capacity and the ability to be able to put that work through. So we are working closely with our provider sector colleagues on getting as much work stood back up as it's possible to do in a COVID safe way. That's what's driving the planning for the second 6 months of the year. That said, the expectation is that the broad framework for the second 6 months of the year will look like we are given a financial envelope which takes due regard of how much money we've spent in the first 6 months of the year and applies that to the second 6 months of the year, but we will be expected to live within it.
Thanks, John. Glynis, then John W.
Hi, John. Am I right in understanding that the outstanding CHC assessments could be a considerable liability for us, that presumably we'll have to meet within that envelope? And can you assure us that there's a plan for that?
Yes, so from a financial point of view, Glynis, we're not expecting that to be a hit. So the situation at the moment is that people who are in receipt of a package of care, that cost is in the system at the moment. They won't have been assessed as to whether that's a health service cost or a social care cost. But for any of those retrospective things, it won't be swung one way or the other. There will continue to be recourse to a separate source of funding for that. I think the bigger or as big a concern, and if Darren's on the call, yeah, Darren may want to comment on this, is it obviously places quite a lot of burden on actually getting those assessments done.
Okay, thank you.
Darren, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So I'd absolutely agree with John. And I know we've had conversations in other meetings around the potential financial burden. I think we can now identify the funding streams for that. But there are a number of options around how we undertake the assessments in a full and thorough way. That's coming to an exec discussion tomorrow. So happy to update the governing body as we go through that in terms of what our preferred options are to make sure that we have sufficient capacity to do the appropriate assessments.
Thanks, Darren. John, you've just turned your hand off. Did you still have a question?
I had unmuted myself and it seemed to mute it again. And so John, just about COVID specific costs. So I think those costs are around 31 million. Will the cover from the government be net or gross? So if we have cost efficiencies or some savings elsewhere, will we get paid the 31.5 million pounds, or will it just be enough to take us up to break even? If you understand what I'm saying. So if we've got some reduced costs like in placements, will that reduce the amount that we'll get in our COVID covering costs or not?
Yeah, so I can't answer that with certainty, John, but there are a number of things where the cost structure has changed. Some will have gone down either permanently or temporarily. Some will have gone up permanently or temporarily. So there's a bit of swings and roundabouts in there. But what we expect to come through in terms of COVID costs will be very reflective of what we've spent on COVID costs in the first 6 months. Okay. So some of that swings and roundabouts that I'm talking about will be happening in the background, but specifically on COVID costs, we expect that it will be very similar in the second 6 months than it was in the first.
Okay.
Thanks. So, John, can I just ask just one last thing? So we're reporting a break-even position under the advice of NHS England, but we're very dependent on NHS England coming good with their it's a promise, but they're a commitment to cover excess costs. But as you say there, that's a risk. So we are kind of reporting a break-even position just in a risky way, because there is a degree of uncertainty there. It's difficult to quantify that uncertainty, but are we capturing that in a significant risk for us?
So again, Paul, I'd make a distinction between first half of this year, which is what we're reporting on at the moment. So the risk to achieving break even at the end of September, which is the extent of the financial framework that we have certainty on, I would say is very low. So we've got an 8 million adverse variance, but all of our experience in the previous months will say that will be reimbursed because we've had the right governance around it, and it will pass those tests. So in terms of getting to the end of September at break even, I'm totally confident about that. Everything beyond there is a little bit of speculation until we've seen the final confirmation of what that allocation will be, and we're able to make that assessment about our ability to fit our costs within it. That's something which, as I say, I'll report on more fully at next month's meeting when we've had a chance to properly assess it.
Thanks. But I guess what's helpful there is you're describing we are being, as long as we are being we're documenting our costs with enough clarity and transparency so that we know where the claims should come from and what they should cover, then that's hopefully giving ourselves the best position to maintain that break-even position. Yeah. That's helpful. I've triggered something because both John and Graham want to come in. John.
You're muted, John.
Thank you.
Apologies, Chair, apologies. So that's exactly my point. I mean, will the support we receive be 8 million or 31 million for the first 6 months? Pure and simple, because if we've made, you can use the phrase savings, but there's all sorts of things behind that. If we're 8 million adrift, but we spent 31 million on COVID, does the support we get, will that come to 31 million or 8?
Sorry, John. Yes, it will come to 31, and we've already had 23 of it.
Okay. Thanks.
Graham.
Just to give assurance to you, Paul, and to members of the public watching, your point about the risk was included on the corporate risk register. It was risk 125. Given that we've had 5 of the 6 months reimbursed so far, and we're approaching the end of September, that's now been stood down to a finance team risk level. So the risk is still there, but it's now held by the finance team, not on the corporate risk register.
Graham, that's really helpful, and that shows that we've got that at least documented and on the radar, so that's really useful. Thank you very much. So we are asked to note this, and I think we've had the discussion and the questioning, which shows that we have noted it, and we've got we paid due attention to that. So thank you very much, John. Item 8.2, performance and quality report. Should be Jane and Darren, is that right?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I start off and then hand over to Darren, if that's okay. Just wanted to say, highlight, obviously this report is reflecting up to month 4 our performance on constitutional standards. As you'll be aware, we are obviously reporting in line with national guidance just on our constitutional standards during this period to manage obviously capacity focused on COVID. I wanted to particularly just draw your attention as well to the some aspects of our performance that we've also got within this report in section 5, data in terms of our weekly performance against these standards that are reported at the end of August. So we have a report that comes in every week as part of our system restoration from our providers. it's unvalidated data, but it gives you a more up-to-date position against these constitutional standards. So just to highlight a few points, in terms of our cancer performance, at the end of July, and we've seen an improvement overall in terms of our 62-week wait, which is a 62-day performance, which really is significant input in terms of the importance in terms of attendance for treatment and response. What we've known now, of course, is that the independent sector has been pivotal in terms of us managing through the COVID period, in protecting both our cancer surgery and our cancer medical care. So that performance obviously is variable across the trusts, but we've managed to see an improvement and upholding that position going into on the latest data. Where we're seeing a challenge coming forward here is in relation to the 2-week wait. What we're now seeing, which obviously is very positive, is a return to pre-COVID levels of demand, but that obviously is positive in terms of people having the confidence to return to see their GPs and obviously being subsequently referred. But that is obviously creating pressure in the system in terms of performance. So we've seen a dip at the end of July, and that position is similarly reflected in the August figures as well. What part of that cause, and you see as a particular issue in relation to Torbay at the July figure, is not only demand, it is also obviously the capacity and the organisation of that capacity in the context of diagnostics and outpatient provision being available when hospitals having to social distance their capacity. So we've got to watch that one particularly very carefully going forward. Where we've seen obviously our particular challenge in relation to our waiting time position, obviously our demographics, we have always had particular challenges in relation to our over 52-week wait performance. That's exacerbated by the COVID situation and the backlog. So we have now the challenge of a loss of significant productivity within our trusts in responding to the PPE requirements, social distancing, etc. So that has seen our performance dip. At the end of July, we dipped below the national position, slightly down to 49.6% compared to the national 52%. It slightly picked up at the end of August. But where we see these numbers manifest themselves is in terms of our long waits, our over 52-week waits. So at the end of August, we were just over 4,000 people waiting over 52 weeks. That reflects both outpatient length of wait as well as surgical waits. So what we have is a major challenge there, which is obviously our focus in terms of our efforts in how we put our capacity in place to address that. We're not alone in that situation. Obviously, it's a national position, but as I say, our demographics make that more challenging. So our focus in what we're doing about that is specifically about making sure that we are understanding reflect our total capacity across the system. You'll hear increasingly discussions around the concept of a system patient treatments list, and we'll touch a little bit more of that later on in our subsequent meeting. But that is about making sure that we understand the totality of the waiting lists across the system, recognising obviously the importance of ensuring that there is oversight not only at local level within trusts but across the system in terms of length of wait, priority, and of course ensuring that there are regular harm reviews in place to ensure that patients' individual priorities under continual review and expedited as required, depending on that changing situation. These numbers, of course, make that very challenging to do. And what we need to do, therefore, is ensure that we've got good oversight. And I'm sure Darren will say more about that in his report within trusts in terms of that oversight, but also across the system. So it's about making sure that we've really got the ability to understand those waiting lists and ensure that we've got the capability to flex our capacity across the system to respond to where those needs are greatest. Equity is a major issue here, ensuring that we've line up our capacity to respond to those needs wherever that lies across the system. We've also, in terms of diagnostics, obviously pre-COVID was a challenged area in terms of performance, as colleagues will know. Just as we've across the board, the impact of COVID has significantly impacted diagnostics in terms of productivity. And we have a number of challenges in the area. What we've seen here is any performance improvement in this data, and that has improved overall also at the end of August. But within those numbers, we have specific challenged areas. Endoscopy is a particular focus point at the moment, where we need to importantly ensure that we've got sufficient capacity to respond to that service. What you'll see, we have secured funding to increase capacity through the national programme in terms of Adopt and Adapt. That's enabled additional capacity to be planned for, both in relation to endoscopy, but also in relation to MR and CT. And you'll obviously be aware that we've been using Nightingale Hospital to provide diagnostic capability for MR-CT and also non-obstetric ultrasound. So we've got, obviously have a major system-wide agenda here to ensure that we fully stretch all our capacity to the full. Obviously, and of course, ensuring that we comply with all the requirements in terms of infection control and social distancing. But we really have to think very flexibly about how we galvanise our capacity to full effect. In relation to our emergency A&E targets, we have obviously the flip side of COVID has meant that we had experienced a reduced demand during the early stages in spring over the pandemic, which reflected obviously improved performance in terms of A&E target. But what we've now experiencing is levels come back to pre-COVID in terms of ED presentations. And we have experiencing a number of pressure points across the system, particularly in Western, this week also in Eastern, where our acute colleagues are in the systems are under significant demand pressures. Of course, that has to be considered in the context of the time of year we're in, but also we need to factor that in terms of our winter planning, in terms of those levels of demands having increased quite markedly. The 111 performance, once again, an issue. I know Dan to say more about that in his report, but with the proportion of 111 calls answered within the 60 seconds, target did fall again in relation to the report from July to August. So we're significantly under target, though investment has been put in place by the CCG to increase call handler response. But I know Darren will say more about that. But you'll see in section 5, the most up-to-date data at the end of August. I will give the health warning it's unvalidated, is in the report to give you a more accurate picture of the current situation. Shall I take any questions there, Paul, or would I pass over to?
Let's pass on to Darren, and then we'll take questions together for both of you, because there may well be some overlap.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Jane. So really just to add some further context in terms of Jane's update in terms of performance, I'll take the main report as read, but a few things to draw the governing body's attention to. Absolutely, our big focus at the moment is around understanding the quality impacts and the harm from the performance. We are doing quite a lot of system-wide conversations, so we have now got agreement that we will have a system-wide approach to quality and harm. That's from risk stratification through to the harm review process. That is being tested in a number of sort of specialities in current providers at this moment, but we're also exploring how we make sure that's end to end so that we don't miss out on anybody that's particularly on waiting list, not just those that are on the end of 52 weeks. So a significant amount of work at the moment. The main areas of harm seem to be relating much more to psychological harm and physical harm, but to say it's very early days in that particular process. In terms of the winter pressures, or early pressures in terms of systems, obviously we are working with the Western system, particularly around understanding again the impact of delays, particularly in that ED department, both in terms of ambulance waits and 12-hour trolley breaches. Again, we're working with our colleagues in Kerno to do some work with UHP, particularly to do some end-to-end reviews, again, around the harm, but also looking at how we can support the provider in terms of improved pathways and reductions in those particular delays. So a significant amount of work going there, and that is working in partnership with Kerno that has equal impact. A big challenge is obviously around 111 performance, but particularly since our last governing body report, the CQC inspection report into DDoC has also been published. So as we're seeing, in terms of hard metrics at the moment, particularly around call abandonment, answers to calls within 60 seconds, are areas of concern for us. We have, over the last couple of weeks, started to see some improvements. But equally, as we now start to see impacts or increasing elements in terms of capacity, but also in terms of COVID and the 119 impacts, we are starting to see those elements decrease again in increases in terms of call abandonments. So we are working weekly with Devon doctors and our partners in Somerset, CCG, to really understand those particular elements. We have put significant investment in, which does take a little bit of time to get online in terms of training and making sure those individuals are skilled in terms of call handling and then dispositions to the right plan of care. Those individuals are now starting to come online as of this week. So we are optimistic that we will see improvements in our call abandonments, and particularly then in terms of call handling and the CAS, so the clinical dispositions into clinical pathways. But we are working with DDoCs on a weekly basis around their improvement plans. Other areas just to draw the governing body's attention to is that we are working with our partners in Family Health Devon or Children and Family Health Devon to make sure that we are seeing improvement plans there, particularly around delays. And again, I will do a more detailed update in future governing body meetings to get that up to speed. But we have now got improvement plans that are showing good trajectories that hopefully we'll continue to monitor. We have discussed already in governing body around the CHC recovery options, and John's covered that in the finance element. However, there are a significant risk to capacity in terms of getting those assessments back online. Those options are being discussed through the executive team tomorrow, so we will be able to update the governing body in future meetings. And I know there were questions last time, particularly from Simon, around the discharge process of discharge plans. So we know that those are now in place for at least for the next 6 months. Discharge to assess is there, and ultimately what we're working now, particularly in a couple of systems, to make sure that those are further embedded, but making sure that we can support those in terms of capacity, in terms of assessment. And two final things, just to very quickly bring to the governing body's attention. Obviously, as we move into flu season, I would say that flu planning this year has been exceptionally challenging with COVID and social distancing, etc. But despite those challenges, I think as a system, areas have worked exceptionally well. Those plans are in place and are on track to deliver. And then finally, I think from a safeguarding perspective, and particularly from a care home perspective, we are continuing to see increases in Section 42 referrals, probably back now to pre-COVID, but the level of those complexity is quite significant compared to pre-COVID, and that is then linking into numbers of homes, safeguarding reviews and investigations. So quite an emerging picture there as we come out of COVID and start to continue to support the care homes. Again, as we get more detail, I'll make sure that those are reflected in our reports going forward.
Darren and Jane, thank you very much. We've got a number of hands up. Let's take them in pairs. Glynis and Charlotte, and then we'll go back for a response from both of you. Glynis first.
Hi, hello. My question was for Jane, and it was about the 52-week waits, because I think she said they included not only surgery but also outpatients. So presumably where people are waiting for a treatment in outpatients, not a first appointment. Have I got that right? Because I thought our 52-week waits pre-COVID were people waiting for surgery.
It is sorry.
That's right. That's probably a straightforward one for clarification. So let's just hit
it's a total referral to treatment. So we're looking at the whole waiting time coming through. So we will have people waiting for not just surgical procedures, but medical treatments, which may be we may have lengthy outpatient waits, or it may be for an investigation. So it's the totality. It won't always be for surgery.
So is that different to the way in which we were counting 52-week waits pre-COVID?
No.
Okay.
It's just that these numbers now, because of the size, It's we will come back, I think, probably for future meetings and differentiate the numbers to give people a clearer picture of the surgical element versus the non-surgical element.
Glynis, we didn't have any outpatient 52-week waiters before COVID. That's why we used to say it was surgical. It's not a counting thing. It was just a fact.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. I understand that now. Thank you.
So that's helpful clarification. Charlotte.
Hi, yeah, a question for Jane. It was just about the ED, and you talked about obviously the figures going back to what they were before or similar. Do we understand the breakdown in terms of, is it a similar pattern of patients accessing ED? So I was just thinking about when people talk about frequent users, I wanted to understand a little bit more if you knew if it was the same pattern of people accessing ED and the same sorts of things, or whether it's different after COVID, the first COVID spike.
Sure, I don't think can answer as an absolute, but to give a flavour in terms of the Western system, we've done some work trying to understand why particularly there were pressure points in that system, and what we were seeing, what was coming through was obviously the numbers going back to pre-COVID level, but also the complexity in terms of what they were seeing coming through in terms of the majors that were attending as defined. So what is it? So it's quite a complex picture, obviously varies, but complexity seems to have been creating the pressure points particularly, and obviously then the flow through the hospital in relation to particularly in the Western area. But I can't answer that from a more systematic point of view, I'm afraid, Charlotte, but that's just give you a sense of situation in at least one part of the patch.
Jane, I wonder whether, if you know it or can get it, the conversion rate to admission from A&E might give us as a clue as to whether it's a similar sort of balance of complexity and types of presentations. Might be helpful.
Yeah, no, certainly we can. We certainly obviously are monitoring that across each of the trusts.
Gaynor. You might be on mute, Gaynor.
Sorry. Darren, you said that we are monitoring the delayed impact on services and patients because of the waiting times, and we know that the impact on patients, there's a plethora of symptoms, be it physical, psychological, the social disability on themselves, on the family. So that's one thing that we need to be monitoring, but it's also what are we doing about the impact on services that will then have to pick up these delayed waiting times. So we're looking at mental health services, therapy services, social care for increased packages of care, and A&E services, and just how are we doing that?
So again, Jane might be able to come in on this one as well. So there is a lot of work, particularly within the recovery and redesign phase, around this element. So there is significant elements around trajectories, capacity, understanding how we support those individual teams, both in terms of capacity, how we may work differently. So we use different innovations to make sure that we can make sure that we get capacity, but also make sure that we have the right staff and the right skills and protection, particularly as we move into winter. Again, I think there are areas where we're seeing really good practice. So we are seeing good levels of competence in terms of trajectories management, which also then gives us a clearer indication of where we are with the PTL and potentially equity across the system. I would say there are areas that we need to do much more around, and I would say that those are much more in the areas around diagnostics. And I know James already alluded to in particular areas around endoscopy, where I think there are significant risks, not just to long delays, but also in terms of capacity and the workforce impacts of those.
Thank you, Darren. Graham.
Thank you, Jane and Darren, for today's report, and also for leading a really good discussion in a joint meeting between the Quality Assurance Committee and Finance and Performance. So a question, Darren, for you, and it's about the 111 service. We've been talking about the 111 service now for a few months. I think a key decision awaits us about a potential contract extension or going out to the market for a renewal of contract. Do you think that's something that we should be scheduling into a future governing body meeting to discuss the options on?
Yeah, so there are some very specific timelines in terms of those particular areas, and obviously we know that the moment that we delayed. So I think as we move through in terms of the CQC report at the moment and our confidence in terms of the ability to deliver against that, and also in terms of our hope, anticipated and trajected improvements, particularly in terms of call handling, comfort calling, etc. I think no doubt that we would need to have those wider governing body conversations.
Can I just add to that? Is that okay? So just for assurance, really, Graham. So I spoke to Barbara Jones, who's obviously leading it from a contracting perspective for us, because we were hoping to make a decision about a month or so ago now about the future of the contract. Obviously, we've not been able to do that, but we do have that scheduled in to come to commissioning committee in December. So we've got it scheduled in the timetable. The team are working on that on the paper at the moment in terms of what that will need to look like, what the options are, and then obviously if a governing body decision is needed, it will come then in December after commissioning committee.
Thanks. I've got three more people who've raised their hands, and then let's move on from this. Let's have Alison, Simon, and Judy. Alison first.
Okay, Darren, it's again about 111, and I'm conscious that you are recruiting more call handlers, which is excellent. But are you confident that the issue is the number of call handlers, or is there anything about system operation that needs improving? So, for example, if we were benchmarked against another 111 service with better results, would they have substantially more call handlers in place?
So I think it's an absolute fair challenge, Alison, because actually it's not all about numbers, it's not all about the workforce. So I think what we've seen as we've worked with Devon doctors, there is no doubt actually that we do need more workforce, and it's not just about call handlers, it's also about clinicians as well. So both parts of that are in train. Equally, there are areas around system working, about how potentially rotas work differently, how we make sure that we know particular pressure points and how the systems and process can escalate and de-escalate at a more timely manner to prevent backlogs and prevent delays. I am assured that in the conversations, Devon doctors are very aware of some of those particular gaps. They are looking in terms of some of their digital systems and digital processes to make sure that actually there's far more prediction in those areas. So you're absolutely right. It is not just around workforce. That is part of the puzzle. Some of the elements around dispositions and some of the elements around systems are also within the action plan. So we are seeing those as part of the improvement plan going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Simon.
Thanks. Just wanted to take us back to RTT. So we've got clearly 4 times as many people now over 52 weeks wait in the RD&E than we had the previous month, and it's going to get worse. Could we for the September figures have more assurance about actually what we're doing about that and how much we know about it? We know people come to harm if they wait longer and longer and longer. There are some people that are more likely to come to harm than others. So if you're waiting for a critical coronary artery bypass, you're probably more likely to come to harm if you wait a long time than if you're waiting for an ankle operation, perhaps. So we must be breaking down those numbers of people and presumably clinically assessing them for priority. I think we need more assurance here that we've got a system that's going to make sure those people who are more likely to come to harm are actually being looked at and prioritised.
Paul, can I come back on that one?
Yes, please,
yep.
Yeti.
Thank you, Simon. So I think no, absolutely. I think certainly from in next month's report, we will have I'll be able to share the plans that we have in terms of the trajectories that have been agreed as part of the phase 3 submission that has been submitted. It's various iterations still progressing, but that will give us the plans that each trust have laid out in terms of their recovery of activity compared to previous levels for both outpatients, inpatients, and day cases and diagnostics. So that will help us track progress and performance in terms of activity levels as part, and also similarly in terms of waiting list numbers. Most importantly, it's the case mix in terms of and the needs and priorities. So the work around the system PTL that I mentioned that's being modelled is absolutely to get into some like granularity of understanding that relative clinical need and risks. So very happy for us to come back and obviously talk more in depth and get the reporting at a level of depth to give assurance to the governing body.
Simon, you may have seen it as well. I'm sure a letter has come through from NHS England to us and all the providers asking them to do a clinical assessment of all the people who are on that long waiting list. So that should add to that ability to at least risk stratify them and try and find out and identify those that are highest risk. So I think that's been a request from NHS England. I'm seeing nods, so I didn't imagine it in my inbox. So that will help as well. Judy.
I was just wondering if we're looking at any, this is a horrible term, but mass processing initiatives. So there was talk the other day of 1,000 cataract operations being done in Moorfield in 1 week. I recall in earlier waiting list initiatives by really focusing and concentrating and getting a lot of people through the system. Or the other day I heard about a practice in Totnes that had 7 rooms offering flu vaccinations at the same time to get a massive flow through. And I just wondered, I think the public appetite for those kind of things will be much better now than it is at other times, because we're all keen to catch up after COVID. And I just wondered whether you were facilitating anything along those lines between the trusts, or whether we were just waiting for them each to do their own few bits.
No, absolutely. The answer is yes. So where we need to, obviously every trust needs to maximise their capacity, but also look how they can support each other in terms of sharing their approaches in terms of how they do that. Because what part of the work that's been done as part of the phase 3 submission is each trust has been able to set out the impact of loss of productivity that's had across its different service delivery areas, outpatients, inpatients, and the causes of it. So first of all, just in terms of using the capacity that's already available to us, are we using it to full effect? And so and being able to compare and contrast and ask and make sure the colleagues learn from each other, because what we're seeing here is a fair bit of creativity that people are having to apply to think how they can work differently in the space they have and obviously be compliant in terms of infection control, etc. But also, as well as using what we have, we know we need more. So obviously the conversations that led us to be able to use Nightingale for diagnostics has been part of that. And we're also exploring the potential in relation to endoscopy as well. So I think we've got those opportunities. Each of the trusts have got a range of waiting list initiative work underway already in terms of insourced or outsourced, but it's how we can take that to the next level. Particularly an area we're looking at the moment is around the numbers of cases in terms of cataract operations that are performed in a list. There is variation there, and we need to be able to get to the highest level of performance across the board, as well as the additional capacity we bring in. So that piece between all the trusts working as a system is very much what we're going to be facilitating, what we are and will be facilitating more of.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Darren and Jane. I will move us on now. We are due a break. I'm aware that with the time we've got the other work that we need to concentrate on. What I'd like to do is take let's take a 10-minute break. When we come back in, I will ask us to take the committee chairs' reports as read. There is an audit committee paper that we have to approve as governing body, but otherwise comments by exception rather than going through the individual committee chairs' reports, please. And then we will hopefully have a very brief second half to our public governing body. So it's 3:33, let's say 3:40, so 7 minutes rather than 10. And then let's get back in and reconvene then. Right, so we come to the Audit Committee Chair's report. Nick, we will pause on this one because there is the standards of business conduct policy that the governing body need to approve. Nick, are you able to talk us through that?
Thank you, Chair. The paper is in front of colleagues. I must apologise. I think that somewhere in the route of publishing the papers, about 2/3 of the Audit Committee agenda got attached to this paper. Not all of the appendices, I don't think, were required. But the one that we do need to approve, please, is the Standard of Business Conduct Policy, which starts on page, just bear with me for a moment.
Page 118 I've got here.
Oh, well done. Thank you, Chair. 118. So this is an update to a policy that's been in place for some time with some fairly minor changes to it, referring to new national policies on whistleblowing and anti-fraud. And that, apart from the date and updating of committee titles and things, that is the only change made to this report.
And it's been through Audit Committee and been reviewed by the members of the committee.
Yeah.
But has to be approved by us.
Yeah.
Okay, so any comments or questions before we approve this? Sorry, Nick, it might be helpful for some of us. The purpose of this document is
to define the way that we should conduct our business. So there's a lot of detail in it, as members can see, and it goes through the full range of business conduct and outlines the way that we should go about our business, basically.
Any questions for Nick or for other members of the Audit Committee? So we are asked to approve this. Can I ask by exception, please, anyone to speak out or raise their hands if they do not feel able to approve the adoption of this policy? Well, the changes in this policy. Okay, then that gets approved. Thank you very much, Nick. We will take the rest as read. Can I just raise one thing that it would be good for us to consider and maybe ask the exec team to consider? I don't think we should go through the risk profile and the risk register in detail, but given all the conversations that we've had around 111 and out of hours, and very little conversation we've had about the resilience of our in-hours primary care workforce, we've got our risk register records that being a higher risk than our out of hours and of 111. So I just wonder whether we've got, because they're sitting with different committees, whether that genuinely reflects the comparative risk between the two. So just for, I'd ask for the exec team just to have a look at those and just question that for me, please.
So,
yeah.
In answer to that, Paul, the SLT meet regularly and review the risk register for the very purpose of providing a mediation process in the system to make sure that we haven't got one committee that's a hawk and another committee that's a dove in terms of its judgment about what is high risk. So I'm not saying by any means that it's perfect, and your point may well be well made, but we do have at least a process to try and mediate against that.
That's good. Just seems those seem a little bit out of kilter given the things that we've discussed and consider priorities and risks at the moment.
I think that's fair comment and challenge, Paul. Nick is right. So Nikki, could you write to Jade to ask her to add it to the SLT agenda as a specific item to consider?
Will do.
Thanks, Nikki.
Thank you very much. Then for the rest of the committee reports, I'm going to say we take them as read unless anyone wants to raise, and apologies, this often happens for our locality reports, and they get squeezed when we're pushed for time, but apologies, but I am aware that we do need to push on. But comments or questions people want to raise, otherwise we take them as read. Alison.
Just a quick question for Glynis. In her report, it refers to an improvement plan for the Children and Family Health Devon, but it doesn't say when we're likely to get that. And I just wondered if we got a time scale.
Glynis, are you able to?
Do you want me to take that, Chair?
Yeah, Darren, could you take that, because I'm not aware of the timescale for this.
Okay. So we're aiming for the Children's Young Partnership to present to November Quality Assurance Committee as it stands at the moment. So then it will appear in the December papers for here.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions or comments? Then in which case I want to thank all the committee members and the locality leads who take the time to write those reports. They have been read and digested and they are of value, so please don't think that they are not. But I am going to close our public meeting now. So thank you all for attending and contributing. Thank you to those who are taking the time to download and listen to our discussions and debate. Can I ask governing body members to, because this is recorded and therefore put on the website, to leave this meeting and to log back into the meeting link that they had for this morning for us to conclude the work that we have for today. Thank you very much.